Someone laughed softly behind me during the prayer. Not out of grief, but relief. That sound told me everything I needed to know about this funeral. The cathedral was polished, expensive, and heavy with performance. Yet not a single face in the front rows looked truly shaken. The CEO was gone, and to the people who mattered most here, that was not a loss. It was clearance. I stood near the back, deliberately placed there by an assistant who would not meet my eyes. The board filled the front pews. Dark suits pressed, hands folded like a rehearsed photograph. They exchanged glances, subtle nods, quiet calculations already underway. Seats were being reassigned in silence, titles mentally redistributed before the casket was even lowered. I was Felicia Grant, Chief Strategy and Compliance Officer, the person who kept this company alive when lawsuits circled and regulators watched. I wrote safeguards they now pretended had always existed. Today, none of that mattered. To them. I was an inconvenient reminder of the man they no longer had to answer to, a few rows ahead. I caught fragments of whispers drifting back. Now things will be easier. Finally, we can move forward. No one said his name. They spoke as if pressure itself had been buried, not a human being. The injustice sat in my chest, tight and breathless. I had been the last person the CEO trusted enough to see, the last one he called when his voice was already failing. I knew what his silence meant. They did not. As the service dragged on, I kept my posture neutral, my expression unreadable. Grief would have been safer, anger expected. Instead, I gave them nothing. Let them believe I was small, sidelined, already fading. When the final hymn ended and bodies began to rise, my fingers slipped into my handbag, resting briefly against a sealed envelope hidden inside. Thick paper, legal weight, untouched. I did not open it, not here, not yet. They mourned a figurehead, while I carried the truth, waiting patiently for a boardroom brave enough to hear it. Very, very soon. I hope you're holding up right now, wherever this story finds you, and that your mind feels a little steadier than the room Felicia just walked out of. Where are you listening from today? Stay with me, and if this story resonates, consider subscribing, because what happens after the funeral is where everything truly begins. They did not erase me overnight. They buried me slowly, with polite smiles, gentle reassurances, and the quiet confidence of people who believed I would never push back. In the days after the funeral, my name floated through the building like background noise. Familiar, yet unimportant. Something everyone recognized, but no one felt obligated to acknowledge. I remembered when that had not been true. I remembered the first investigation, when regulators arrived without warning, and panic spread faster than any official memo. I worked 3 nights straight, mapping liabilities, isolating exposure, rewriting reporting protocols line by line until nothing contradicted itself. The company survived because I anticipated questions no one else had thought to ask. No press release mentioned me. It never did. The second inquiry was louder, political, and designed to make an example of us. I built a compliance firewall that held under scrutiny, redirected responsibility upward, and spared the board public embarrassment. The third nearly collapsed everything. A misfiled disclosure, a hostile competitor watching closely, and investors ready to flee. I fixed it quietly, rewrote the entire compliance architecture, and trained teams who would later insist it had always been that way. Those victories did not make me visible. They made me convenient. The board referred to my work as support, as infrastructure, as if systems simply appeared on their own, in meetings. They thanked departments, not people. When my name surfaced, it was attached to logistics, not leadership. I learned early that saving a company does not guarantee a seat at its table. After the funeral, the shift became impossible to ignore. Emails stopped including me. Calendars updated without my name. Decisions I once shaped arrived fully formed, already approved. I watched power reorganize itself efficiently and coldly, while I remained exactly where they wanted me. Useful but silent. That was when Everton Miles stepped forward. He spoke confidently, smiled easily, and repeated other people's ideas with theatrical certainty. His presentations were polished and hollow, built on slogans instead of understanding. The board leaned forward when he spoke, nodding as if clarity itself had entered the room. I listened from the edge, recognizing phrases I had written months earlier, now stripped of context and consequence. Everton never asked how the systems worked. He never questioned assumptions. He did not need to. He was there to reassure, not to lead. Watching him accept praise for borrowed confidence lit something sharp and restrained inside me. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Heavier. Waiting. The first strategic meeting after the funeral arrived quietly. I learned about it by accident, overhearing an assistant mention catering. When I checked the schedule, the meeting existed, carefully marked as restricted. My name was missing. No explanation followed, no apology offered. I closed my calendar and sat still, letting the weight settle. They had not forgotten me. They had decided I was unnecessary, and in that decision, they revealed exactly how deeply they misunderstood what was coming next. I felt the anger coil, controlled and precise, the kind that sharpens rather than explodes. Being excluded was not an oversight, it was a message, and Everton Miles had delivered it with a smile. I was invited to the meeting with a calendar notice that used polite language to hide a sharp blade. It spoke of restructuring, alignment, and efficiency, the kind of words that always arrive before someone disappears. I understood immediately what it meant, and I walked in already unemployed. The room felt quiet and deliberate, prepared for my exit, without anger or urgency, just procedure dressed as courtesy. HR sat across from me with a folder already opened, papers neatly stacked as if order itself could soften what followed. "This is not performance-related," she said, voice calm and carefully trained. "The company is moving in a different direction." Everton Miles avoided my eyes, studying the table as though the grain of the wood required his full attention. No one challenged the script. No one asked a question. I listened without interrupting, hands folded, posture steady. They spoke about streamlining, about future focus, about making difficult decisions in uncertain times. Each sentence landed with practiced distance, stripping years of contribution down to a paragraph. When HR finally slid the termination form toward me, the silence stretched. It waited for reaction, for shock, for something messy they could later describe as unprofessional. I thought of the nights I stayed late to keep regulators satisfied, the weekends spent rewriting compliance structures that saved them from exposure. None of that was mentioned. It never is. In that room. History was inconvenient. So it was ignored. Everton finally cleared his throat. "We appreciate everything you've done," he said. Tone flat. Rehearsed. Appreciation, I learned, costs nothing when it arrives too late. No one stood up for me. Not a single voice broke formation. Faces stayed neutral. Eyes lowered, as if silence itself could absolve them. I picked up the pen and signed the document without hesitation. The motion felt almost ceremonial. When I looked up, I smiled, small and controlled. The smile unsettled them more than anger would have. "Security will help you gather your things," HR added gently, as if offering a courtesy. I nodded. "Of course," I replied. The escort waited outside, uncomfortable, avoiding conversation. As we walked past familiar desks, no one looked up. I was already erased, rendered invisible by policy and fear. At my desk, I packed slowly, deliberately, a notebook, a framed photo. Nothing of real value. I could feel eyes watching, colleagues pretending not to notice. When the box was full, I paused, then turned back toward HR. who hovered nearby to ensure compliance. "Before I go," I said calmly, "I'd like to initiate a full access handover." She blinked. "Access." I nodded. "All systems, credentials, oversight tools. I don't want there to be any confusion later." Everton looked up then. Surprised. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly. I kept my tone even. "It's better this way. Clean transitions prevent risk." They exchanged glances, unsure how to refuse without appearing careless. HR finally agreed. Scribbling a note, I handed over everything, methodically, thoroughly, leaving nothing unaccounted for. When it was done, I lifted the box and walked out without looking back. They believed this was the end. A quiet removal handled with manners and paperwork. They believed courtesy equaled control. As the elevator carried me down, I felt the humiliation settle, cold and sharp. But beneath it, something steadier took shape. They had taken my position, not my leverage, and they had just accepted the handover that would make what came next inevitable. From here, the story begins to change direction. The meeting with the attorney did not feel dramatic. It felt precise, almost quiet. The kind of calm that only exists when chaos has already been anticipated. Her office overlooked the city. But we did not talk about the view. We talked about paper, ink, intent, and timing. Everything the board believed they controlled had already been decided elsewhere. She was the CEO's personal attorney, not a firm contact, not someone Everton Miles could intimidate with speeches. She slid a folder across the desk without ceremony. Inside was the will, cleanly drafted, properly witnessed, and the transfer agreement attached behind it. "It's immediate," she said. "No conditions, no delays. 55% of the company. Effective the moment it was signed." I did not react. I had known the number. But seeing it documented carried weight. This was not symbolic ownership or influence. It was control. Undeniable and final. The attorney watched me closely, perhaps expecting relief or excitement. Instead, I asked about challenges, capacity claims, contestation, injunctions. She answered calmly, already prepared. Every angle the board might use had been considered and sealed. Then she opened a second folder. Thicker, more worn. This one was personal. Notes in the CEO's handwriting filled the margins. Arrows connecting names, dates, habits. "He asked me to give this to you when the time was right." She said, "He called it your map." It was exactly that. A map of weaknesses, patterns, and quiet fears. One director panicked when confronted publicly. Another hated delays more than scrutiny. Everton Miles was marked with a single line: performs confidence, avoids responsibility, collapses under sustained pressure. The CEO had not been sentimental. He had been thorough. We talked through implications, through what 55% meant in practice: board removals, voting power, asset freezes, authority that did not require permission. The attorney's voice remained steady throughout, as if discussing routine maintenance rather than corporate upheaval. When she finished, she leaned back slightly. "You could act today," she said, "legally. Nothing stops you." I looked down at the documents, then closed the folder. Acting immediately would satisfy impulse, not strategy. I understood the board's psychology too well to rush. They were still confident, still careless. They believed I had been neutralized. That belief was valuable. "I'm not ready," I said. The attorney nodded, unsurprised. "Good," she replied. "They will show you more if you wait." I left the office without announcing anything, the documents secured and invisible. The city moved as usual around me. Unaware of how close one company was to fracture, I felt no urgency. Calm settled in, deliberate and controlled. This was not the moment to reveal power. This was the moment to observe. That evening, messages filtered in from former colleagues, rumors of asset sales, talk of restructuring plans Everton Miles was eager to announce. They were moving quickly, without restraint, exactly as I expected. I listened, stored details, and said nothing. At home, I placed the folder in a locked drawer and sat in the quiet. The storm was forming, loud and obvious to anyone paying attention. I was. Possession of 55% did not demand noise or threat. It demanded patience. I would let them believe the board was intact, the hierarchy secure. I would let Everton enjoy his borrowed authority a little longer. When I finally moved, it would not be defensive or emotional. It would be irreversible, for now. Silence was not weakness. It was preparation. And they had no idea what was waiting just beyond their confidence. I noticed the damage before anyone admitted it existed. Because destruction rarely announces itself, it hides inside confident emails, rushed approvals, and signatures that arrive too quickly. Once I was gone, the board moved with a speed that felt less like leadership and more like panic. They called it momentum. I recognized it as erosion. Every decision carried tension, sharp and humming, the kind that vibrates just before something breaks. I stayed silent, watching closely. The storm had finally begun inside the company. I learned about the asset sales through whispers, forwarded documents, and a calendar invite sent to the wrong assistant. Buildings sold below value, patents licensed with vague exit clauses, contracts signed with partners known for litigation. Everton Miles framed each move as bold progress. In truth, they were carving future liability into the company's spine. Risk was being pushed forward, buried under optimistic language. No safeguards, no legal buffers, just speed and ego. I felt tension coil tighter each day. They were selling stability for applause. I began documenting everything quietly, without asking permission from anyone. I collected emails, drafts, unsigned attachments, and version histories that told a far different story than public announcements. Files appeared after midnight. Approvals skipped review. Legal warnings rewritten into suggestions. I built timelines, not narratives, dates, names, authorizations. Each decision connected to a person who would later deny responsibility. The tension sharpened as patterns emerged. This was not strategy. It was extraction. They were looting the future while standing in the present. I worked methodically, detached, careful not to trigger alarms. Evidence requires patience. Impulse ruins leverage. I remembered that, so I waited and gathered more. The silence around me grew heavier. So did my resolve. Every file felt like tightening a wire around them, slowly, deliberately at last. By then, the board's behavior had shifted from careless to aggressive. They pushed deals through emergency channels, bypassing compliance entirely. I watched Everton Miles praise efficiency while ignoring warnings written directly beneath his signature. When questions surfaced, they were dismissed as obstacles. "We'll handle it later," he said during one recorded call. Later was where lawsuits lived. Pressure built across departments. Engineers complained quietly. Legal teams stopped asking questions. Everyone understood what resistance cost. I kept copying files, exporting logs, preserving metadata. Every action felt like standing beneath a structure already cracking. I was no longer angry. I was alert. Anger wastes focus. Tension sharpens it. I needed clarity, not release. So I stayed invisible. Invisible people see everything when others stop watching entirely around them daily quietly. The first attempt to erase evidence arrived disguised as routine maintenance. A message went out instructing technology teams to purge archived logs. The justification cited storage efficiency. I knew better. Those archives tracked authorization trails. Deleting them would fracture accountability. I waited. Then my phone vibrated. It was the director of technology. Voice low. "Careful. I was told to delete everything," he said. I refused. The tension snapped into focus. He explained that the order came directly from above. No documentation, no ticket, just pressure. He asked what he should do. I told him to preserve everything and say nothing. Silence protects integrity, I said. His relief was audible. He was not alone. Others were watching, waiting for permission to resist. I documented his refusal carefully. It changed everything. Lines had been crossed, and someone inside finally chose principle over fear without hesitation at. From that moment, the situation escalated quickly beneath the surface. Everton continued smiling publicly, privately. He tightened control. More closed meetings, more urgency. I sensed desperation. They knew something was leaking, though not what. I secured copies off-site. Redundancy is survival. Tension filled every exchange. I slept lightly. Alert even in rest. This was no longer preparation. It was containment. They were still breaking the company. I was making sure they could not erase how. The evidence grew heavier. So did the silence around me. Every move forward narrowed their options. They just didn't know it yet. I stayed calm. The storm tightened quietly. Patient. Waiting for the moment it would finally be named inside the boardroom walls surrounding them fully. They thought chaos favored them. They were wrong. Chaos favors whoever prepares longest. I closed my laptop that night without satisfaction. Only focus. The company was bleeding slowly. They believed no one could trace the wound. They forgot who designed the systems tracking everything. I was still here, unseen, and I was finished waiting. The tension no longer pressed. It aligned. Something irreversible had started. Tomorrow would not be quieter. It would be precise, and precision is merciless. They had chosen their path. I simply recorded it. That choice would soon define them. The storm was no longer forming. It was ready. And I finally understood exactly when to let it break publicly, without hesitation or warning for anyone involved from this moment. If you're someone who looks deeper than most, don't leave. This next part is for you. The silence after the storm did not last. It sharpened into something more focused, more dangerous, as if the company itself was holding its breath. I had just finished securing the last backup when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Calm and deliberate. I knew before answering that this was not coincidence. Someone had noticed movement beneath the surface. And large institutions do not ignore patterns for long. The voice on the line introduced herself without warmth. She represented one of the firm's largest investment funds, a stakeholder whose patience shaped markets quietly. "We need to talk," she said. There was no accusation, no reassurance, only expectation. I agreed to meet, aware that every step now required precision rather than force. This was not about exposing villains. This was about credibility. The meeting took place in a glass conference room high above the city, neutral and stripped of personality. She arrived with two analysts, tablets open, eyes sharp. I did not bring documents. I brought numbers. When she asked why the company felt unstable, I answered without drama. Declining margins, accelerated asset divestment, deferred legal exposure. I spoke evenly, citing figures they already knew but had not yet connected. The room stayed quiet. They were listening. I did not mention Everton Miles by name. I did not describe boardroom arrogance or ethical collapse. Revenge does not reassure capital. Discipline does. I walked them through a 90-day plan designed for containment, not conquest. Freeze non-essential sales. Pause risky partnerships. Reinstate compliance review gates. Restore audit trails before regulators noticed the gaps. Every step had a cost, a timeline, and a measurable outcome. No slogans, no promises. One analyst interrupted. "And authority?" he asked. It was the first real challenge. I met his gaze. "Authority follows alignment." I said, "If the structure holds, leadership adjusts." That was as far as I went. They did not need the full truth yet. The numbers were doing the work for me. The woman leading the meeting folded her hands. "You're asking us to tolerate short-term pain," she said. I nodded. "I'm asking you to avoid irreversible damage," I replied. Silence stretched. I let it. Silence is useful when people are calculating. They asked about liquidity. I answered. They asked about employee retention. I answered. Each response was clean, contained, verifiable. Finally, she leaned back. If you move too early, she said, the board will fight. If you move too late, value collapses. I allowed myself a small pause. Timing is everything. I agreed. Her expression shifted slightly. Not approval, recognition. She closed her tablet. We won't act yet, she said. But if you move at the right moment, we will support you publicly. The sentence landed heavier than any threat. Conditional backing from a fund like hers changed the equation entirely. It was leverage without exposure. I understood the gift and the risk. When the meeting ended, there were no handshakes, just a nod. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had happened. Inside me, calculations reassembled. Support was no longer hypothetical. It was waiting. That meant hesitation carried cost now. Back home, I reviewed my timeline again. The board was accelerating mistakes. Everton was growing louder. The fund was watching. I did not feel triumph. I felt pressure, controlled, precise, relentless. This was no longer about proving anything. It was about choosing the moment that would decide everything. I closed my laptop and sat still. The storm had given way to a narrow path, and I would have one chance to step onto it correctly. I was done observing. The next move would be visible. That visibility did not scare me. It focused me. I thought about the engineer who refused to delete records, about the analysts quietly flagging inconsistencies, about how fragile confidence becomes when truth aligns. The fund's condition echoed in my mind. Move at the right moment. Not first. Not last. Precision mattered more than speed now. I opened my notes and adjusted timelines, linking board decisions to legal exposure with dates and signatures. Each connection tightened the structure around them. I wasn't preparing a confrontation. I was preparing inevitability. By the time I stood up, the path forward felt narrow but solid, like a bridge built under pressure. Tomorrow, I would stop waiting. Not loudly, not dramatically, just deliberately. And once I stepped forward, there would be no safe way back for anyone involved. The decision was made, measured, and irreversible in ways they could not undo. Momentum from the investor meeting followed me into the building, steady and restrained, as if the air itself expected something irreversible. The boardroom door stood open, voices inside confident, unaware that the balance had shifted. I stepped forward without announcement, carrying silence with me, and every word the room stopped. They did not expect me there. Everton Miles sat near the head, relaxed, rehearsing confidence, while the chairman frowned. An assistant whispered that I was no longer authorized. I nodded politely, remained standing, and waited, letting discomfort spread naturally, patiently, until someone finally spoke and revealed how fragile authority was. The chairman cleared his throat and said my presence was inappropriate. His tone was formal, distant, practiced. No one looked at me. Everton smiled faintly, enjoying the performance. I listened, expression neutral. Knowing politeness often masks fear better than aggression ever could in rooms like this, where power quietly rots. They asked me to leave. Not raised voices, not insults, just procedure. I did not argue. Instead, I stepped forward, reached into my bag, and placed a sealed envelope on the center of the table. Paper met wood softly. Yet the sound changed everything instantly, without permission, warning, or apology. For a moment, no one touched it. The room felt suspended, breathless. The chairman opened the envelope slowly, eyes narrowing as he read. Everton leaned forward, curiosity replacing arrogance. I remained standing, hands clasped, watching comprehension arrive piece by piece across their faces as certainty collapsed under legal clarity now. The document was simple and devastating. A valid transfer of ownership, properly witnessed, effective immediately. 55%, Control, no debate. Silence thickened. Everton's confidence evaporated first. The chairman's face drained next. Someone whispered denial. Someone else whispered lawsuit. I said nothing, allowing the truth to do its work fully. Everton finally spoke, voice sharp with disbelief. He questioned authenticity, motives, timing. He questioned me. I met his stare calmly. The chairman intervened. Promising review, delay, process. I recognized the tactic. Process was their shield when power slipped from their hands, and fear replaced confidence around the table quickly there. I took my seat then, not invited, but unquestioned. Ownership rearranges furniture without asking. I explained nothing beyond what the paper stated. Facts do not require persuasion. The board argued among themselves. Voices low, urgent. I observed quietly, noting who panicked and who calculated exits before consequences fully settled in. The chairman raised his hand and spoke carefully. "We will contest this," he said. "We will take legal action." The threat was expected, almost comforting. I nodded once, acknowledging reality, not fear. Litigation was noise. Ownership was signal. They had confused the two and exposed their last remaining defense publicly. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, and stood. The meeting was over, whether they accepted it or not. I gave them the courtesy of time, not explanations. As I walked toward the door, I felt the room fracture behind me, confidence splintering quietly under the weight of undeniable authority now. In the hallway, my breathing remained steady. The silence inside had followed me out. Assistants pretended to work. Phones stopped ringing. I did not look back. The board had chosen conflict. I had chosen inevitability. The difference would become clear very soon once legal clocks started moving beyond control then. Outside, the building looked unchanged, indifferent. That illusion would not last. I knew the next phase would be louder, messier, public. This meeting had been the warning shot. They promised lawsuits. I promised nothing. I simply prepared to finish what had already begun with precision patience and absolute control now. The decision to threaten court revealed their weakness more than strength. Confident leaders negotiate. Cornered ones litigate. I welcomed the noise because it would expose everything they tried to hide. Each filing would freeze assets, slow deals, and preserve records. Exactly what the company needed before irreversible damage became permanent. As I stepped into the elevator, I felt no triumph, only clarity. This was no emotional victory, only structural correction. They had misjudged silence as surrender. Soon they would learn the difference. The first board meeting was finished. The real confrontation had just begun, and it would not remain contained. If you watch until the end, you will understand what everyone else missed. The threat of litigation did not slow them down. It provoked them. Within hours of that board meeting, the silence I had carried shattered into noise, sharp and chaotic. Emails leaked, calls multiplied. The board had chosen panic over restraint, and panic is always loud. I felt the storm gather not outside the company, but inside it, tearing through routines that once pretended to be stable. They accused me of manipulation first. Anonymous statements appeared in trade publications, suggesting I had exploited a dying man and engineered control through deception. The language was cruel by design, meant to stain credibility before facts could speak. Everton Miles went further, calling reporters personally, framing himself as the defender of corporate integrity. "She's destabilizing the company." He told one outlet, "We're acting to protect employees." It was almost convincing, if you ignored who had signed the reckless deals. Next came the emergency filing, a rushed petition alleging incapacity, coercion, and imminent harm. They wanted speed, hoping a judge would freeze everything before I could move. Their lawyers worked overnight, flooding the docket with urgency. I read every page calmly. The arguments were loud, repetitive, and thin. Volume was doing the work logic could not. Still, noise creates pressure, and pressure demands response. I did not answer the press. I did not issue statements. Instead, I locked the company down, using my authority. I froze all pending asset sales, halted contract executions, and suspended executive compensation changes. Transactions stopped midstream. Banks were notified. Partners were warned. The machinery slowed abruptly, grinding against itself. Inside the company, confusion spread. People asked questions they had been afraid to ask before. Silence turned inward, heavy and uncertain. Everton reacted badly. He sent messages demanding reversals, threatening breach claims, invoking tradition and hierarchy. I ignored him. Power does not debate. It acts. My legal team filed responses that were short, precise, and unemotional. Every document referenced signatures, dates, and statutes. No adjectives, no outrage. The contrast mattered. One side shouted, the other demonstrated. The hearing came faster than expected. The courtroom was crowded, tense with competing narratives. The board's counsel painted me as reckless, ambitious, dangerous. They spoke about fear, instability, risk. My attorney spoke about procedure, ownership, validity, preservation. Judges listened to structure, not drama. I watched Everton from across the room. His confidence flickered, then hardened. He was betting everything on speed. When the judge spoke, the room stilled. The ruling was narrow and devastating. Pending review. All material actions were frozen. No asset sales, no executive changes, no contracts altered. Status quo preserved. The words were calm, deliberate, final. The board had wanted motion. They got paralysis. Their entire strategy depended on momentum. Momentum had just been confiscated. Everton whispered furiously to his counsel. Reporters rushed for quotes. I did not move. The storm had broken, and the air afterward felt cleaner, sharper. Outside, cameras flashed. Questions flew. I passed through without comment. Silence. Again. Did its work. Back at the office. The effect was immediate. Deals collapsed quietly. Partners paused. Banks requested clarification. The board's leverage evaporated under the weight of the court order. They had called the press to apply pressure instead. They exposed their own desperation. Every accusation now circled back. Unanswered. Unproven. Stalled. That evening, I sat alone, reviewing the order again. It did not give me victory. It gave me time. Time to audit. Time to rebuild. Time to let the truth surface without interference. The board was frozen, their power suspended between intent and consequence. They had demanded a storm. They had forgotten storms obey physics, not ego. I closed the file and leaned back, breathing evenly. This phase was over. The desperate resistance had spent itself. What remained would be slower, quieter, and far more damaging to them. The company was no longer slipping out of control. It was locked in place, waiting. And now, for the first time, the waiting favored me. The court order did more than freeze transactions. It exposed fractures that could no longer be hidden. With movement halted, scrutiny rushed in. Auditors asked questions that had been deferred. Regulators requested clarification that could not be softened by optimism. The company stopped running forward, and when it did, everything unstable collapsed inward. I watched the chain reaction begin. Calm and inevitable. The first crack appeared around the CFO. What started as routine requests for documentation turned into formal inquiries. Expense reports did not align. Bonus structures bypassed approval thresholds. Deferred liabilities surfaced without explanation. The CFO insisted it was administrative error, then blamed teams, then stopped answering calls. Within days, investigators arrived. The board released a statement expressing full cooperation, language that always signals distance. I said nothing. Numbers were speaking clearly enough. Next came the resignation. The interim CEO, carefully positioned as Everton Miles's shield. stood at a podium and announced he was stepping down for personal reasons. His voice shook. He spoke about family, about timing, about transition. No one asked questions. Everyone understood. He had been elevated to project stability, not withstand pressure. Without momentum, he had no purpose. He left quietly, escorted by advisors who avoided eye contact. Investors reacted faster than the press. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were postponed. One fund issued a cautious statement about governance concerns. Another froze participation in future rounds. Confidence, once fractured, does not wait for resolution. It withdraws. Share prices wavered. Analysts revised projections downward. Everton's optimism disappeared from public view. He canceled interviews. The narrative he had tried to control no longer belonged to him. Inside the boardroom, tension shifted into fear. Members stopped speaking freely. Conversations moved to corners. Legal counsel attended every discussion. Blame circulated like currency. I listened, present but unobtrusive. Collapse is rarely loud at this stage. It is quiet, procedural, filled with sudden absences and formal language. Then one of them broke. A board member requested a private meeting. Urgency clear in the subject line. He arrived early, eyes tired, voice lowered. He did not waste time. "I need to protect myself," he said. He offered documents, messages, approvals he had been pressured to sign. He named names. He detailed instructions. He wanted immunity, or at least distance. Betrayal is never ideological. It is practical. I listened without reaction. I asked questions, precise and limited. Dates, witnesses, copies. He provided everything. When he finished, he waited, desperate for reassurance. I gave him none. I did not promise safety. I promised process. That was enough. He left knowing he had crossed a line he could not uncross, but believing it was better than sinking with the rest. The fallout was immediate. His cooperation triggered further reviews. More discrepancies surfaced. More emails appeared. Everton's authority disintegrated as allies recalculated risk. Board members avoided him. Staff stopped responding. Power isolates before it disappears entirely. I observed from the center. Steady, letting consequences travel their natural path. Publicly, the company maintained composure. Privately, it unraveled. Committees dissolved. Consultants withdrew. Internal memos grew vague, then silent. I issued no statements. Silence was not absence. It was control. Each failure revealed another, cascading forward without intervention. By the end of the week, the board no longer functioned as a unit. It was a collection of individuals negotiating survival. The CFO faced formal charges. The CEO was gone. Investors distanced themselves. One board member defected openly. Everton Miles remained, cornered and exposed, watching the structure he relied on dissolve around him. As I reviewed the evidence now secured, I understood this phase was complete. The collapse had spread far enough. Trust was gone. Authority fractured. The company needed resolution, not reaction. I closed the file and prepared for what came next. This was no longer about dismantling. It was about deciding who, if anyone, deserved to remain standing when the dust finally settled. The collapse had reached its natural end, and what remained was not chaos, but vacuum. When institutions lose their center, someone must step into the silence and give it shape. That responsibility arrived quietly on my calendar as a final board meeting, stripped of adjectives, stripped of resistance, framed as procedural necessity rather than consequence. There would be no debate about authority this time. That question had already been answered elsewhere, far beyond this room. I entered the boardroom first and took the chair at the head of the table without ceremony. The leather was still warm from earlier meetings. Echoes of decisions now rendered irrelevant. No one objected. They followed in small groups, subdued, careful with their posture and their words. Everton Miles arrived last, shoulders tight, his former confidence replaced by calculation. The atmosphere was heavy, but not hostile. This was not a battlefield. It was an operating room. I opened the meeting with facts, not emotion. The court order remained in effect. The interim chief executive's resignation was acknowledged and entered into the record. The investigation into the chief financial officer was noted, along with the external oversight now attached to it. No commentary followed. Silence filled the gaps where arguments once lived. Power does not need to announce itself. It simply proceeds. Uninterrupted and unchallenged. The first decision concerned termination. I read names aloud, one by one, citing clauses, breaches, and documented failures. Each dismissal was legal, precise, supported by paper trails none of them could dispute. Some stared at the table. Others watched my hands as if movement itself might signal mercy. There were no raised voices, no protests. Everton shifted in his seat but said nothing. When power leaves a room, it does not slam doors. It drains sound. Next came appointments. I outlined a temporary leadership structure composed of people with operational discipline, not political loyalty, independent directors with no personal debts inside the company, and interim operations lead with no internal history to protect. Compliance restored as a central function, not an accessory. I did not ask for votes. Ownership made voting redundant. Heads nodded slowly, understanding the reality settling around them. Everton finally spoke, attempting one last appeal. "You can't rebuild without experience," he said. Voice controlled but brittle. The sentence was carefully chosen, meant to sound reasonable. I looked at him evenly. "Experience without accountability is how we arrived here," I replied. That ended the conversation. Words no longer carried leverage. Only structure did. As the meeting progressed, something unexpected occurred. I stopped at one name and did not continue. A board member looked up, startled, then wary. He was the one who had come forward earlier, the one who had broken ranks to preserve evidence when silence would have been safer. I paused deliberately, letting the absence of sound do its work. "You will remain," I said, "for now." The room reacted immediately, confusion first, then suspicion. Everton's eyes narrowed. The retained member did not look relieved. He looked exposed, aware that survival had conditions attached. I explained calmly, "Continuity matters," I said, "and so does testimony." No further clarification was required. He understood his position perfectly. Protection and obligation had just merged into one role. With that, the agenda closed. I summarized next steps, timelines and expectations. External audits would proceed without interference. Communications would remain centralized and controlled. No unilateral decisions, no statements without approval. The company would move forward methodically or not at all. Recovery would be measured, not announced. When I stood, no one followed. They waited, instinctively, until I left the room. In the hallway, staff moved aside, unsure whether to speak or look away. I acknowledged them with nods. Nothing more. Authority is not familiarity. It is direction. Applied consistently. Back in my office, I closed the door and reviewed the minutes. Everything had been recorded, signed, archived. The final meeting had taken less than an hour. Years of imbalance corrected without spectacle. That was the difference between revenge and resolution. One seeks noise, the other seeks permanence. I thought briefly of Everton Miles, sitting alone now, recalculating a future he could no longer influence. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt completion. The structure had been restored, not by force, but by inevitability. As the day ended, I looked out over the city. Tomorrow would bring rebuilding, scrutiny, and responsibility. But tonight, the company was quiet again, stable in a way it had not been for a long time. Power had returned to its rightful place. Not loudly, not cruelly, but absolutely. The boardroom emptied. and what followed felt quieter than victory, quieter even than relief. There was no sense of triumph waiting to be savored, only a calm that felt earned, like the stillness after a long fever finally breaks. The work that remained required a different posture, one less about control and more about repair. That shift began the next morning, when I stood before the senior leadership team and spoke not as an avenger, but as a steward of something wounded yet still alive. I announced the restructuring plainly. Departments would be stabilized before expanded. Compliance would report independently, without buffers or favors. Decisions would move slower than before, deliberately slower, with accountability attached to every signature. Speed, I told them, had been the luxury that nearly destroyed us. There were no dramatic promises and no language designed to soothe, only clarity. As the meeting continued, I watched faces soften, shoulders lowering in small, visible increments. Uncertainty is exhausting. Direction, even difficult direction, allows people to breathe again. The message to employees followed soon after. It was careful, measured, and precise. I explained what had happened without spectacle and what would change without threat. There would be no layoffs tied to the board's failures, no quiet purges disguised as efficiency. People had carried this company while others gambled with it. They would not be asked to pay for that gamble. The response arrived quietly. Emails came late at night. Short notes of thanks appeared without expectation of reply. Within days, the hallways felt different, less guarded, less tense. Stability returned gradually. Projects resumed under review. Timelines were adjusted with realism instead of bravado. Partners who had gone silent began returning calls. Investors asked questions again. Not from fear, but diligence. They wanted process, documentation, and continuity. I answered each inquiry with the same restraint I had practiced throughout. Trust is rebuilt through consistency, not declarations. The numbers responded first. Cash flow steadied. Exposure narrowed. Morale followed later, cautious but genuine. Only after the ground steadied did I speak publicly about the past. Not in an interview and not at a press conference. Instead, in a company-wide meeting, streamed and recorded. I stood at the front with no script and no notes. This company survived, I said, because people here chose integrity when it was easier not to. I did not name individuals or teams. Credit, when distributed too precisely, becomes another form of politics. That sentence was enough. Then I addressed the question no one had asked aloud, but everyone carried. Why me? Why the former chief executive had trusted me with control rather than the louder, more visible voices around him. I paused before answering, letting the room settle. He didn't choose me because I was loyal. I said, he chose me because I was consistent. I explained how. Years earlier during the first internal investigation, he had watched quietly. He noticed who stayed late to document instead of speculate, who refused shortcuts when pressure mounted, who asked what happened next instead of who would be blamed. I had never known he was watching. He never told me. He didn't need to. I shared one final detail. In his last weeks, when the board pushed relentlessly for speed over caution, he had asked a single question: who would protect the company if he could not? He didn't want brilliance or charisma. He wanted restraint. He told me opportunity seekers burn quickly. I said, caretakers endure. I turned back to the desk and opened the next file. Justice had been served. Now the company needed leadership, not memory. The collapse had resolved into silence. And silence finally gave me space to step forward. I entered the CEO's office on Monday morning without ceremony, carrying the quiet weight of everything that had unfolded before it. The hallway was calm, almost ordinary, which felt earned. This room had once symbolized distance and authority, but now it felt simply functional. I did not pause for effect. I did not sit immediately. I stood, letting the stillness settle, knowing the chaos that preceded this moment had finally resolved itself into something stable. It was not victory I felt, but alignment. A rare sense that events had landed exactly where responsibility belonged at last, without noise or witnesses. The furniture remained untouched, just as he had left it, and that felt intentional. I kept the desk, the chair, the books exactly where they were. Change for its own sake was never his style. He believed continuity mattered more than symbolism. I understood that now. I moved to the wall and rehung the framed sentence he once insisted stay visible. Not inspirational, just honest. A reminder rather than a slogan. It anchored the room. And me. Against excess, ego, and impulse. I read it silently, letting the words settle again. They still carried weight. That mattered to me now. I sat down then. Not as a conqueror, but as a custodian. The company no longer needed spectacle. It needed repair. Messages waited, meetings scheduled, expectations forming quickly. I did not rush. Power, when used correctly, slows the world instead of accelerating it. I thought of the people still inside the company, working carefully, hoping stability would return. It was my responsibility to make sure it did. I had not taken control to win arguments. I had taken it to end them. The difference mattered more than authority ever could. That truth steadied me completely on this quiet morning alone. Before leaving, I stood once more and looked around the office. Nothing here belonged to ego. It belonged to decisions, consequences, and time. I spoke aloud, softly, repeating the sentence on the wall. Not as ceremony, but as confirmation. It was not meant to impress. It was meant to restrain. That distinction explained everything that had happened. From the funeral, to the courtroom, to this chair. I carried those words with me as instruction. They had guided me when emotion threatened precision. They would continue to do so. Leadership required restraint long after victory. I was prepared for that now. As I left the office and stepped into the week ahead, I felt something rare and complete. Satisfaction without cruelty. Justice without noise. The company would heal because it had been protected, not seized. I understood, finally, what he meant when he trusted me. Power is not awarded to those who crave it most. It belongs to those who know how to hold it. Quietly, when it matters. This Monday was proof of that truth. It was interesting for all the right reasons, and it was only the beginning of responsibility. I accepted it without hesitation. That choice felt just. This story reminded me that real strength isn't loud, rushed, or cruel. It's patient, disciplined, and rooted in principle. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay quiet long enough to let the truth surface on its own. As you listened, how did it make you feel? Was there a moment or detail that stayed with you longer than the rest? And where are you listening from right now? If this story resonated, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment, tap like, share it with someone who might need it, and consider subscribing so we can continue this journey together. 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 Continue this journey together.